Okay, welcome back. So in this second video, what we're going to do first is make a case for why we should talk about climate change. So as I said, we're focusing on one particular issue this week, climate change, and then we'll talk about how to communicate that. But first, so we're all on the same page, I wanted to take some time to explain why this is such an important issue and why it's something that we should be talking about. And just so we're all on the same page, to define what climate change is, it's this long-term shift. So long-term, that's really important. It's different from weather, which might fluctuate from day to day, but climate change is this long-term shift in these global or regional climate patterns. And often when we say climate change, or when you hear the term climate change, that's referring specifically to rising in global temperatures. There are other effects as well. Rising temperatures is just one of them, but specifically from the mid-20th century to the present. So when you hear the term climate change, that's what's being referred to. And we've also already had some exposure to this if you think back to week 8 when we were thinking about the anatomy of scientific papers and how to find the main points of papers. One of the excerpts that you were asked to identify the main point from was from a paper about the effects of climate change. And in that particular review paper, what they stated was that our integrative analysis finds that even under strong mitigation scenarios, so mitigation means even if we do something and change our actions to help to reduce the effects of climate change, even if we do that, there will still be significant human exposure to climate change, particularly in tropical coastal areas, and such exposure will be much greater if greenhouse gas concentrations continue to rise throughout the 21st century, and this isn't going to have a distinction on an effect between poor or rich countries. All are going to be affected equally. And so again, just so we define the terms we're talking about here, if we talk about greenhouse gas concentrations and emissions, what we're referring to are in part the gases, including carbon dioxide, that are released into the atmosphere through a variety of human activities. So here in this pie chart, which we've also been introduced to as a form of data visualization, they're showing million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So that's what this stands for. If we wanted to have a standalone figure caption, we should include that and explain our abbreviations, right? But here, if I explain it to you, we can see that here, if we're looking at emissions, and this is just from California, a lot of those emissions are caused by two main things. The first being transportation, so driving our cars, and the second being industrial, so factories and that kind of thing. And so these gases are produced by activities by humans, and the effect of that is, if we look here on the right-hand side, here are those greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. What happens is they form this blanket around the Earth in the atmosphere, which we'll talk about much more later. But what happens is when you have higher levels of that, it has a thicker blanket. And so the effect is that instead of heat being radiated out, like it's shown here on the left-hand side under natural scenarios, here under human enhanced and human impacts, that heat is instead bounced back here off of that blanket, and so it's trapped here in the atmosphere next to the Earth. And so when we say greenhouse gas emissions, that's what we're referring to, are these gases like carbon dioxide. We'll actually talk a little bit later about a better term to use than greenhouse gas emissions. But this term greenhouse comes from, if you think about when you have plants stored inside a greenhouse, the heat gets trapped in there, it gets really warm. So that's where this idea comes from, because you're trapping heat in the atmosphere surrounding the Earth. And if we think about how climate change is affecting us, there have actually been some interesting recent studies done through Sac State here. They recently released the results of an environmental poll in May of 2019, so very recently. And what they found was that climate change is affecting families. And so again, this was a poll conducted through Sac State. Sac State has something called the Institute for Social Research, and this was also conducted in conjunction with a nonprofit called Valley Vision. And what they found through this poll, they basically polled a bunch of different people to gain insight into the general public's opinions about climate change. they found that 88% of respondents said that air pollution is a problem in their communities. And so that, again, is often caused by industrial things. So if we're releasing this carbon dioxide, it's causing pollution, and so that's causing a problem. 70% of people who took the poll said that they believe that the effects of climate change are having an impact on their families and where they live. And they used examples like wildfires, drought, hotter temperatures, and flooding as serious problems that have affected them. So if you were around in this region just about this time last year, you remember we had the devastating Paradise wildfire. It's basically fire season year-round now because of the way the climate is changing, and so that's having a big impact on the way that people are living their lives. In this study, they also found that 63% of people are either very or extremely concerned that climate change will harm future generations. So here we have this image, this person showing up to a climate change rally saying he's there for his son's future. And so this is another really big concern about climate change is what are we doing to the earth? What are we leaving for the next generations? And then this last finding, which I think is really encouraging, and we'll talk more about this later, 95% of people reported taking at least one action to protect the environment. And that included things like conserving water or energy, or even buying energy efficient appliances. So those have those little Energy Star ratings on them. So things like fridges, microwaves, washers and dryers. So this study found that overall people thought they were being affected, but they were also taking some small steps in the right direction to try and protect the environment, which is great news. Another reason why it's really important for us to talk about climate change is they did another recent study. This was conducted by NPR, National Public Radio, and they found that most teachers don't teach climate change. So this is a cartoon here showing some elementary school kids, but it's also not taught very often at the university college level either. Despite that fact, the people that they polled, 4 in 5 of parents wish that climate change was taught in schools. And what I thought was interesting was that if you read the results of this study, this transcended whether or not the people even had children. So whether or not you have kids, overall, people are wanting climate change to be taught in the curriculum in our schools, and it's not currently being done very well. And so this basically could be an entire course, and we're doing it in a single week, so we're just barely scratching the surface here. But what I do want us to focus on are some 5 key points about climate change, and then we'll talk in subsequent videos about how to convey that information to other people in the public, for instance. So the first main key point about climate change I want to convey is that climate change is happening now. This isn't something that, oh, we'll have to deal with this later, or it's not really happening or affecting us right now. No, it's happening right now. If you look at this graph here on the y-axis, we have carbon dioxide level, parts per million. Here on the x-axis, we have the years, and this is shown as years before today, 0 being 1950. So if you look here, you can see this line bounces around a little bit. The 1950 level is shown here. We are way up here. And so over all of these millennia, the atmospheric carbon dioxide had never been above this line. And now we're way up here. So this has been happening since the 50s. It's happening right now. And I've already shown this pie chart. Another main key point about climate change is that it's caused by us. Humans are the ones causing it. And again, if we look at this chart of carbon dioxide emissions, most of those emissions are caused by things that humans do. So transportation, driving our cars, burning fossil fuels for energy in factories, our agriculture, electricity, and either running things in our homes or at our businesses. So climate change is something that is happening. It's being caused by us and the activities and behaviors that we are engaging in. The best way to slow down climate change is to reduce heat-trapping gases. So I said before that greenhouse gases, they've actually done some research and shown that when you're communicating to people, using the term heat trapping gases is more effective. We'll talk more about that in a subsequent video. But again, the idea is the same. You have heat trapping gases like carbon dioxide causing that heat to be trapped here in the atmosphere. The best way to slow down climate change is to reduce the emission of those gases like carbon dioxide. Another key point about climate change is that, like we said, it's happening now and it's already altering species and ecosystems. So we think about this from an ecological environmental standpoint. Lots of species are at risk for extinction from climate change. So here in this figure, I know it might be a little bit hard to read, but I'll pull out the main points for you. On the left here, we're looking at which groups are most at risk for extinction from climate change. And some of the main types of species are amphibians and reptiles, where they're both around 10 to 13% of those species are at risk from climate change. And if we look on the right-hand side, where we're focusing on the different regions that are at risk from climate change, South America is one of the main regions that is at a really high risk. The species that live there are at a really high risk from extinction due to climate change. And then this is a point that honestly I hadn't thought very much about before I was putting all of this material together, but climate change is also affecting human health. So as a marine biologist, I often think about the effects of climate change on the environment, but it's also impacting all of us as humans as well. So if we look here on the right-hand side, we see that there are different types of ways that climate change is affecting our health. It's affecting medical and physical health, so there are heat-related illnesses as the temperatures are rising, heat waves are happening, people are experiencing hyperthermia, sometimes even dying during really extreme heat waves. Allergies are becoming more prevalent as the flowering period for many different species of plants is extended because the temperatures are warmer, so there's more pollen, allergies are more severe. Another way that climate change is impacting human health is that the warmer temperatures are increasing exposure to waterborne and vector-borne illnesses. So things like malaria are actually becoming more prevalent because the conditions, those warmer temperatures, are better conditions for spreading those types of diseases. Mental health is also affected by climate change, so people often experience stress or anxiety or sometimes even post-traumatic stress disorder after these major climate events like droughts or floods and fires. And then community health too. So they've actually shown from several studies that climate change increases social instability, interpersonal aggression. So climate change is affecting human health in a variety of ways as well. And so if you've just heard all of those things and thought, oh my goodness, this is awful, the world is ending, I just wanted to take a minute to address that climate change does very much have emotional impacts and an emotional effect. And so I wanted to acknowledge that, and we're going to spend a lot of time in this module focusing on how to reframe that thinking from this kind of doom and gloom into the positive. What can we do about this? How can we solve this problem? But I do understand that, and again, as I was putting this together, I was kind of thinking, oh my goodness, this is awful. And so just know that caring about climate change can be overwhelming, but we're all in this together, and there are ways that we can fix this and solutions that we can find, and that's what we'll focus on as we talk about how to communicate climate change in this module.